Thanks for joining us as we continue our coverage of the search and rescue operation from a sunken ferry off Korea's southwest. It's Thursday, April 24th here in Seoul, and I'm Choi Yu-sun. As the entire nation mourns the loss of those who were on board the ill-fated ferry, Korean authorities are broadening their investigation into what exactly happened on the day the ferry capsized and who is responsible for this man-made disaster. And for details, we now go to our Yu-Lian standing by at our news center. Lian.
Hi, Yu-sun. Good evening, Yu-sun. Actually, of all 15 crew members, including the captain that escaped the doomed Sewol-ho ferry, are now facing criminal charges. 4 of the 15 have been charged with negligent homicide and violating maritime law within the past few hours. Now, the comments coming from the crew members are causing quite a stir. While answering questions from reporters earlier today, one of the elder crewmen with the surname Son claimed that he stayed in the vessel as long as he could to assess how serious the situation was until he was forced to flee and later be rescued. But the radio transcripts with marine traffic control showed that the crew members tried to escape only 10 minutes after they made the announcement, telling passengers to stay in their cabins, and as soon as the rescue team arrived on site. Now, as for the captain, Lee Jun-seok, who was one of the first people to escape the sinking ferry, authorities are still looking into charging him with what's called murder by omission. Now, murder by omission is pursued when death is caused by inaction on the part of the defendant.
Lian, prosecutors are cracking down on the operator of the ferry, the Cheongjin Marine Company. Tell us more.
That's right. Prosecutors seem to think that the fundamental reason behind the sinking of the ferry could lie with its operator, which faces allegations that it lobbied its way out of regular safety checkups. A joint investigation team is now looking through the documents collected from its raid of the offices and homes of company owner Yoo Byung-on. The company's audit report last year shows that its entertainment expenses since 2001 had amounted to over $900,000 US. The prosecution is looking into both Cheongjin Marine Company and its affiliate Cheonhae to review how these expenses were used, with speculation again that some of it may have gone toward lobbying lawmakers in order to opt out of safety checks and also to increase their assets.
Now, there are multiple bills being proposed to prevent such a disaster from occurring again. What can you tell us about that?
That's right. New bills proposed as well as revisions being made. The Maritime Ministry has announced that it will revise related laws to permanently revoke a crew member's license if a ferry accident leads to any deaths. Take a look.
An accident, especially on huge vessels, has a direct link to people's lives. We have to make sure those that have been negligent or made mistakes should never be allowed to practice their license.
Now, there's another put forth by the Maritime Ministry that would only allow captains that hold first-class sailing licenses to sail vessels weighing more than 6,000 tons. The Sewol-ho came in at nearly 7,000 tons, and the captain of the Sewol-ho ferry, Lee Jun-seok, holds a second-class sailing license, which is allowed under current regulations. The new set of proposed legislation comes after President Park Geun-hye called for a review of the entire disaster and emergency response system earlier this week. I'll bring you more updates in our later newscasts.
All right, thank you, Lian. And in waters off Korea's southwestern coast, search and rescue operations are well into the 9th day, but not a single survivor has been found since the ferry capsized last Wednesday morning. And for the latest, we now go to our Song Ji-san at Paengmok-hang Harbor, just 20 kilometers from the accident site. Ji-san?
Well, Yu-sun, more than a week has passed since the Sewol-ho ferry sank underwater, and the death toll hasn't changed since 2 p.m. after hitting 171 today, and with 131 still missing. Now, today was very critical in terms of search and rescue because the tide and currents are expected to get stronger tomorrow. And among the bodies recovered today was that of a male student who made the first emergency call to report that the ship was sinking. The student's surname, Che, is considered to have saved those that survived the accident, all 174 of them. The divers focused their search on the 3rd floor where the cafeteria is, but did not recover as many victims as they hoped for. The search also focused on the fourth level of the ship, where the cabins of the most Hanwon high school students were located. Divers also said there were no air pockets present inside the sunken ferry, leaving a chance of finding possible survivors after the ship sunk completely underwater.
Chisun, you also told us earlier that there was a row between families of the missing and the authorities there. Can you tell us more?
It's been more than 3 hours since the desperate and angry and now exhausted parents have been showing doubts and distrust against the government and the ongoing search operations. In fact, they're now speaking with the Oceans Minister and the Commissioner of the Coast Guard, questioning whether there were enough search operations today. The parents want more diving distance lines are installed to fourth deck of the sunken ferry, where the most students are expected to be, and that more private divers are brought into operation. Families of the missing are convinced that the authorities did not go forward with the rescue operation as they told them so, and it's pretty certain at this point the private divers who volunteered to participate in the rescue operation have completely pulled out after conflicting with the Navy and Marine divers. But parents want them back as they think there are not enough divers out there to go underwater and search for what the parents now say, the bodies of their loved children. This has been Song Ji-sun reporting live from Paengmok-hang Harbor in Sindo.
With prospects dimming on finding any survivors on the sunken ferry, people have begun to ask the question, how will the almost 7,000-ton ship be recovered? Some experts say if working conditions are favorable, it may only take 1 to 2 months. We look at some of the possibilities and what is likely to become a lengthy procedure of recovery. Our Lee Ji-yeon reports.
With families of missing passengers requesting officials to conclude search operations soon, discussion on how to salvage the wreckage is expected to gain more momentum. The large ferry weighs over 6,000 tons on its own, but with added weight, it's expected to exceed 10,000 tons. Salvaging the 7,900-ton ferry Ariake, which capsized off the coast of Japan in 2009, was a challenging operation because of the cargo that had shifted to one side. A similar situation with the Sewol-ho ferry. It took over a year to salvage the ship with cranes after cutting it into 4 pieces. Then how about operations for the Sewol-ho ferry? Currently, there are 5 cranes on standby near the accident site, including an 8,000-ton crane, the largest in the country. Floating docks are set to be brought in as well, but the salvage process is likely to face a rough start because the ferry now lies upside down. Salvaging the ship as is may cause damage to the upper levels of the vessel. The safest and most realistic method being considered is to use both cranes and floating docks at the same time. First, chains would go around the vessel, then lift bags filled with air would be installed to slowly put the ship on its right side up, while pulling it closer to the surface. Then, the floating docks can be taken underwater to support the vessel from below and push it up.
And whilst there may not be the expertise in Korea, there is international expertise, and interestingly, this is the method they intend to use for phase 2 of the Costa Concordia salvage. So there is a precedent. It's not easy. Please don't misunderstand me. This is not an easy operation, but it is within, if there is international help and experience available, that might assist the Korean salvage company in achieving its aim.
The government continues to look through all options to identify the best method. It has requested cranes and barges from China while asking the Japanese shipbuilder that initially built the Sewol-ho ferry for assistance. Lee Ji-yeon, ARIRANG News.
The epicenter of grief and frustration over the past 9 days has been the Jindo Indoor Auditorium, where families of those missing from the sunken ferry still wait to hear word about their loved ones. For more on the situation at the gymnasium, we go live to our Connie Lee. Connie, how is it there right now?
Hey, Yusun. Well, the family members of those still missing have asked officials to finish their search operations by tonight, but that seems highly unlikely as there are 130 people still unaccounted for. Now, just moments ago, in the screen to my far right was a description of the latest body recovered from the sunken ferry. Now, the description includes what that person was wearing, including their height and their weight. And so as soon as that slide came up, we saw a lot of family members running up to the screen to see if it was their loved one. Now, it's been quiet here for the most part, unlike the situation at the Paengmok-hang Harbor or where our reporter Ji-sun is. And I've been talking with a father today who is still looking for his one and only son, and all he says is that he wants his son out of that ship as soon as possible. Now, although hopes for finding any survivor is dim, what I can tell you is that for family members still waiting here, they do have a glimmer of hope that their loved one could be found alive. Now, those families who left this gym are those who had their loved one confirmed dead, but those still remaining here say they can't help but not lose hope. Yusun?
Connie, families have been living at the gym for over a week now. How are things being run there?
Well, there are hundreds of volunteers here inside the gym and outside the gym, and around the clock there are doctors and nurses who are going around and checking up on the families. Now, there are, of course, other family or volunteers who are cleaning up inside and outside the gym and providing people here with blankets and clothes. We also have different food companies offering meals, snacks, and drinks. And not only are there Korean volunteers, but there are also many foreigners pitching in to lend a helping hand. Now, just outside, there are people here from Turkey offering up Turkish kebabs, and there's also a sign on their table that says in Korean that they wish for the safe return of all those still missing. Reporting live from the Jindo Gymnasium, this has been Connie Lee.
A temporary group memorial altar has been set up in Ansan, the city most touched by the latest disaster. Thousands of citizens are visiting the site to say their final goodbyes to those who have passed away. Kwon So-ah is at the site and joins us live from the Ansan Olympic Memorial Hall. So the atmosphere must be incredibly somber.
Yes, it has been, Yusun, but now the atmosphere is very tense as well. Around half an hour ago, a woman, apparently a mother of a student that died in the tragic Sewol-ho ferry accident, became angry at cameras filming her as she was crying and calling out her son. The entire press had to move out of the hall as the woman began to push camera equipment and throw bottles. Now, in the meantime, the lines of mourners have become incredibly long as the evening is progressing. They reach out onto the streets in front of the hall. So far, more than 20,000 people from all around the nation have come to the Ansan Olympic Memorial Hall to say their goodbyes to those who passed in the accident. Many are having trouble even standing in front of the over 60 pictures of the victims that are on display, and the sound of wailing of mourners fills the big hall. Students, teachers, and faculty members from Paengmok High School have been among those paying respects. The local government here has also set up message service so that those who cannot come in person can send text messages of condolences. The messages that come through are being displayed on one of the screens here. This group memorial is open 24 hours a day here in Ansan, except for certain times of the day for regular maintenance purposes. The memorial will be open throughout the weekend as well. Now, I'll be bringing you more updates in our later newscast. This has been Kwon So-ah reporting live from the Ansan Olympic Memorial Hall.
It's not just those of us here in Korea, but people around the world have reached out to Korea in this time of need. Korean Americans have set up memorial altars throughout the United States, expressing support for the victims and their families. Kim Hyun-bin reports.
Overseas Koreans in Los Angeles set up a memorial altar in front of the Korean consulate, and it's been adorned with messages of hope and flowers.
It is heartbreaking for the children. I've been keeping them in my prayers since the incident.
Memorial altars have been set up across the world by Koreans living overseas. Those visiting a temporary altar in Washington, D.C. said they were at a loss for words about the tragedy and plan on holding a fundraiser for the victims' families.
It's not just in Korea, but people in the U.S. as well are also crying for the lost ones.
In Times Square in New York, more than 200 Koreans and foreigners attended a memorial ceremony to show support for Korea and all those here who are suffering from the devastating tragedy. Kim Hyun-bin, ARIRANG News.
U.S. President Barack Obama is in Tokyo today on the first leg of a week-long trip to Asia. Following summit talks with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe earlier on this Thursday, the U.S. president made comments that are sure to catch the attention of China. Our Kim Ji-yeon reports.
During his 8-day four-nation tour of Asia, U.S. President Barack Obama is trying to reaffirm America's commitment to its allies on the other side of the Pacific. In Japan, Obama set out to convince Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe that he can deliver on his security and economic pledges, with an existing defense treaty between the two countries taking center stage. The current language requires the U.S. to come to Japan's defense if the country is attacked. After his summit talks with Abe, Obama said Thursday that the treaty extends to the disputed island chain known as Senkaku in Japan or Diaoyu in China. This means that if a conflict were to take place on the islands, the U.S. would be obliged to respond. This is the first time the U.S. president has sided with Tokyo on this sensitive issue, which is sure to upset Beijing. The two leaders also held discussions on a Trans-Pacific trade agreement, but failed to come to an agreement. They pledged to continue to exchange views on the matter. After finishing up in Tokyo, Obama will come to Seoul where he will meet with President Park Geun-hye on Friday. He is to express his sympathy to the victims of the South Korean ferry disaster. The two leaders will also talk over ways to respond to the North Korea threat, particularly with the possibility of a fourth nuclear test from Pyongyang looming. President Obama is also expected to express his support to President Park's vision on reunification of the two Koreas. In a speech in Dresden last month, she urged the North to expand reunions of families separated by the Korean War and increase cross-border economic and cultural exchanges, which include the South bolstering humanitarian aid. It will be Obama's fourth visit to South Korea, which represents the most trips to the nation by a sitting U.S. president. After departing from Seoul, Obama will head to Malaysia and the Philippines. Kim Ji-yeon, ARIRANG News.
Shifting our focus to the economy now, Korea's gross domestic product grew at the fastest pace in 3 years in the first quarter of this year. Central bank officials say the latest figures confirm that the nation is on a recovery track. Our Sun Jung-in has more.
The Bank of Korea said Thursday that the country's real GDP grew 3.9% in the January to March period from a year earlier, spurred by strong exports and expanding private spending. This quarterly growth is the fastest on-year gain since the first quarter of 2011. Compared to the previous 3 months, the economy was up 0.9%, maintaining its growth of around 1% for the third consecutive quarter. The bank said the expansion was helped by steady growth in exports, which gained 1.7% from the previous quarter. Among other factors contributing to the recovery were a surge in research and development activities and a gain in investment in the construction sector. Central bank officials said the first quarter growth signaled the Korean economy is returning to its normal growth track. Director General of the Bank of Korea's Economic Statistics Division Chung Young-taek said if this pace of quarterly growth continues, the country would be on track for an annual 4% growth for 2014. Earlier this month, the central bank upwardly revised this year's growth forecast to 4% from 3.8%. Chung, however, added that a variant would be economic impacts from last week's tragic sinking of the Sewol-ho ferry, particularly on consumer sentiment. Son Jung-in, ARIRANG News.
And it's time to check on stories making headlines on the global front. We go live to our Paulie at the News Center. Paul, let's start with a deepening crisis in Ukraine. It looks like Ukraine's government has gone on the offensive against pro-Russian groups. But have they made any progress?
It appears so, Yusun. The Ukrainian government says its military has regained control of a central government building in the eastern city of Mariupol from pro-Russian separatists. 3 pro-Russian activists were reportedly shot dead during the overnight operation. But these separatists are still occupying key government buildings in at least a dozen other towns in eastern Ukraine. Tensions have been rising after pro-Russian militants rejected a 4-way deal reached in Geneva last week to de-escalate the conflict. Meanwhile, Moscow's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has warned Russia will respond sternly if its interests in Ukraine are directly attacked. And turning now to the Middle East, the United Nations Security General Paengmok-hang has called on the Security Council to act in Syria in order to provide greater access for aid for the war-torn country. In his recent report to the Council, Pan said nearly 3.5 million civilians were in need of vital assistance, including medicine and urgent medical care. The UN chief accused all parties in the Syrian conflict of, quote, flagrant violations of international law. Over 150,000 people have died in Syria's 3-year civil war, while millions have been displaced from their homes. And finally, let's take a look at the global economy. Business activity in the Eurozone is forecast to experience higher growth in the second quarter, as it recorded a near 3-year high in April. Germany's data firm Market's Purchasing Managers Composite Index, also known as PMI for the Eurozone, rose to 54 from 53.1 in March due to an improvement in both the manufacturing and service sectors. But experts say further signs of falling inflation is becoming a concern for the currency bloc. That wraps up our look at international stories making headlines around the world. I'll be back with more updates in just a few hours.
Weather conditions on Jindo look to be fairly calm today, but it may not last for much longer. For more, we turn to our Kim Bo-kyung standing by at the Weather Center. Bo-kyung.
Yusan, today is the last day of the neap tide, so from tomorrow, speed of tidal currents will go up to about 2 meters per second. Well, at the moment, visibility on Jindo has opened up to 18.3 kilometers, and wind speed is at 5.8 meters per second, while waves remain fairly gentle at 0.6 meters. All efforts must be put into rescue operations through later tonight. At 9:52 p.m., the speed of tidal currents will dip to as low as ½ meter per second. Now, we will get 4 more slowdowns tomorrow, but they will not be as slow as today's. Well, as for the weather outlook on Jindo for tomorrow, it looks to be similar to today with calm waves and breezy winds. Now, tomorrow's conditions in other parts of the country, dry weather advisories have been issued, and early summer-like conditions are forecast with daytime highs peaking from between 20 to 24 degrees. Well, that's all the weather updates for now, and I'll be back with the latest after 10.
Thank you, Bo-kyung, and that's all we have for you at this hour. But stay with us for more on day 9 of the sunken ferry search efforts on our next newscast at 9 p.m. Korea time.